Well, hi. Welcome to the manager panel. I've been thinking a lot recently about how you sort of, I don't know, manage managers and transform them. And I've got three people on who I know have some interesting experience and things to say on that topic, and some that I've spoken on that topic. So let's get right into it. Why don't you introduce yourself first, Jana?
Hi there. My name is Jana Werner. I head of transformation at Tesco Bank in Scotland, in Edinburgh. Leading an organizational-wide transformation program. All parts of the organization, no stone unturned, from tech to culture. So lots of managing managers in that space.
That's right. And how about yourself, John?
Hi, John Osborne, enterprise architect, IT executive, and I love building and fixing high-performance teams.
And yourself, Neville?
Hello, everybody. My name is Neville. I have been a manager for a couple of years now. I lead a team of fantastic engineers that run modern cloud platforms at Comcast.
So I wanted to start off with a little bit of definitional stuff and kind of like what we sort of think of and the advice that I see that managers have when they're sort of doing things in a more agile way, or they've been working with a head of transformation, or, you know, they're doing the digital transformation stuff, fixing up how they do software and run it so they can fix up and improve the way they do business. Now, a phrase that I hear a lot is this idea of servant leadership, and the notion that I think the way that an enterprise architect put it once is, instead of sort of policing, you're partnering with people. Now, that's an enterprise architect view of it. But I wanted to start with you, Jana. Like, when you think about this idea of servant leadership and you've kind of like seen it in action or tried to get people, what is that? What does that mean?
A really good question. I can tell you what it means in theory, certainly. I think to me it means really the opposite of what I know probably more well than that, is the opposite of command and control. So it's the idea of supporting people, asking questions and helping them, removing barriers and setting the context for people to be successful and optimizing their work, their environment, their culture, their processes, really ultimately enabling people and getting the best out of people, I would say.
And so, Neville, you know, given that description, like, do you have an example of what that has looked like in work that you've done, or if you have been, what's the opposite of a servant? If you've been tended to in either direction?
So the way, you know, I think of it, right? Like, when you say a servant leader, you know, I definitely think of somebody who puts their kind of employees first, you know, develops them and helps them perform, you know, to the best of what they can do. And as a result, you know, we kind of achieve the goals that we all set out to do. And you know, to your question specifically, Mike, right? So the opposite of that would be like your employees kind of serving the leader, right? And you know, and doing what the needs of the leader is, right? So we kind of try to, you know, bridge that gap where, again, you know, it's a collaborative thing that, you know, we all have to do together. We spend an exorbitant amount of time with our teammates, so much more that they become, you know, part of your extended family. And when it comes to family, it becomes very personal for all of us, right? You always check in with your family at all times to see how they are doing. Do they have any problems? Encourage them to take initiatives. You know, try out new things that you haven't tried out before. You know, when they're going through tough times, you want to provide help and guidance, right? And all of these things happen in the workspace as well, right? Simple examples where, you know, we are putting, you know, the people first and taking care of, you know, what their needs are, right? When, as a manager, you have a one-on-one, you know, with your employees, right? That is time you are taking out of your schedule to first, I would say, listen and understand, you know, what problems they have, and to provide feedback on how they are doing, and not only that, how they can improve on new opportunities, right? So that's like a very simple example. I think if you take it at a little bit higher level, when you look at companies do. There is a standard for gauging, customer loyalty, right? Like we call the NPS or the Net Promoter Score. There are a lot of companies who do eNPS, which is an employee NPS, to see how motivated are employees, right? And are they happy in the workplace? Do they have everything? And then, we collect all that information, we share it with the team, and it's all anonymous, right? But, the idea is to look at that data and see how are team members doing? How is morale, right? Are there things that they really like to do? And if there are things that are not really very ideal, how do we all work together in order to do that, right? I can take a real world example where we brought in a whole bunch of people from different teams to work on a project for a short period of time, and when that project ended, the eNPS rating was through the roof, right? People loved it, right? And it was an indicator for us to say, well, these are things that we should invest in, right? Because it certainly felt like people loved doing things like that, learning things new, right? I can certainly also talk about some other companies that have taken the path of seating the management along with the employees, right? And I think that is more towards the movement of we are in it together. That's how I feel about when we talk about the servant leadership.
So John, over the years, I definitely this idea of a family that you're nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of fits well into that. And to kind of get to the managing the managers part, I'm wondering, in your experience, what does it mean to be a servant leader to other leaders, or does that not happen? Is there sort of a point in the hierarchy where you're just the boss again and you're kind of managing the leaders who are the servants, or does it kind of go all the way up to the top?
I think when I think of servant leadership, it's really about removing barriers from teams, right? So if you think about a servant in a castle 200 years ago, their job is to remove all these barriers from the king or whatever, the queen, so that they can just have their life, right? So I think if you're a servant leader, you're instead of saying, oh no, you have to use this tool because it's what we spec'd out, and you come to me as a team and say, no, we want to buy a new one. A servant leader is supposed to go and figure out how to make that happen, right? Not say stop and keep your barriers there. So I think if you're managing the managers, you're doing the same thing. One, you're holding them accountable for, hey, how come you're not asking me to solve problems? Because your teams certainly have problems. So where are the problems and how do we get those solved? And then also the barrier removal. If you have managers that are asking for things and they're getting, no's, how do you help them and support them and work with your peers at your level to make sure that these problems can actually get resolved? So I think, nobody wants to work in giant hierarchies really in this way, but a couple levels deep, I think that works really, really well. As long as you're, having retros with your managers every week, hey, what came up this week? What do I need to know about? And what do I need to fix next week?
So Jana, you and I did an interview on one of my podcasts once about a kind of a write-up of some experience you'd had at your company. And this idea that John, he's introduced this idea that one of the things that's okay to do as a manager is tell your manager you're having problems and need help, which, when I was counseled as a young up-and-coming person who had a big dry cleaning bill and was trying to be all fancy, I was told you never bring a problem to your manager. You only bring a solution. And so, in your experience of helping transform an organization, kind of forced under the pressure of we need to deliver this quickly, right? So,
yeah.
How did managers and executives get comfortable with saying, I need help? So, to kind of move things along rather than sort of hide and kind of wait out that a problem might be solved instead of getting help quickly.
I think it comes down to culture, and you need to shift the culture, and that I've learned this funny sentence living in the UK, the fish smells from the head. So I think, I hope that translates. So I think if your execs and your leadership are comfortable with that, it translates down through the hierarchy of managers to get comfortable to ask questions and to not know the answer and to get comfortable with uncertainty. I think the big switch is from thinking that a leader needs to be seen to know everything and understand everything and have an answer to everything. And therefore, I think the people working for these leaders also think they need to know everything and understand everything and have everything in control. So I think if you can be seen as vulnerable and comfortable with uncertainty and with finding your way through it, then the people that work with you can get into that same space and be more comfortable sharing. And I think therefore you find problems.
I think Jana froze a little bit there. Perhaps she'll come back and we'll get some more insights there. But let me go back to you, Neville, on this point, and see if you've experienced this, like, to use the metaphor, to de-rot the fish head. Like, I think one of the things I hear frequently is that it's important for as high up towards the head as possible to essentially demonstrate, as Jana was saying, that vulnerability, right? To kind of like walk the talk, if you will. And is that, again, my dry clean self back at the beginning of this decade feels very nervous about that. Is that something that actually works? That if you kind of go up the chain, you can start to demonstrate, you can kind of start the blameless postmortems by talking about the big mistakes and what people have learned from it up in the management stack. Does that trickle down?
Well, I think, we certainly have changed culturally, right, over a long period of time, right? Like, again, I've been at Comcast, for about like 14 years and I've worked in the industry for almost close to, 20 years, right? And when I started off, it certainly was the fact, as you mentioned, you don't want to, talk about problems, right? Like, you may try doing that, to people underneath you, but it doesn't go usually upwards. The culture has changed, right? And I think, to Jana's point, I think it's very important that, we all understand that we are all humans, right? And humans have problems, right? Whether they are up or down the stack. When you have a problem, we all need help. And sometimes, we the expectations seem to vary really, when folks don't understand the problems or don't communicate the problems, effectively, right? So, our culture that, we are developing is the fact that, when there are problems, we have open communications. We can easily, talk about, our problems. But in addition to talking about our problems, we also come up with solutions. Right. So you can, one of the things that I encourage, my team to do is I think we want to hear what the problems are, but it's also good to say, I think here are some of the additional solutions that I think, we should do. And then to John's point, work collaboratively in order to figure out how we can do that. Now, when you have that buy-in, up and down the stack, we are all on the same page. And then, we can easily say, and, like, we can achieve these goals, in a much better fashion than, having that cut off where, if people don't know what the challenges are and are not communicating that effectively, it just goes back to like, us not being able to achieve the goals of our organizations.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. And, sort of along those lines. So, John, I think, I think I've met several people over the years, and I think you've been in this category a few times where their manager tells them, like, to be flippant about it, go make some trouble, right? Like, go do things in a new and different way.
I wouldn't know anything about that, Coté.
And I think all three of you are either in or have been in that situation many times. Sure. But like what's interesting about that is that it sort of requires going out of the status quo to start to move things along. And I think it also like gives you an outside view on that status quo, or to use a phrase that people use every now and then, the frozen middle, which is to say the thick, tasty layer of middle management between the visionary, deliver on shareholder value people who are just ready to go, and then often the sort of I think we call them individual contributors, the staff, who often are surprisingly enthusiastic about changing and doing things in a new way. And instead, there's kind of these layers in the middle. And I wonder, in comparing like the kind of mavericky role that you've had and looking at this frozen middle, if we apply a little bit of empathy, like what's up with these frozen middle people? Like, why do they not unfreeze? Like what are their concerns?
So in my experience, I think, a lot of it has to do with the whole hierarchy hasn't understood what's going on. So a lot of times you start at the team level and the team's loving it and everything. And then these middle manager people are like, wait a minute, I don't have to tell you what work to work on. You have a feedback loop and you're just operating on it. And so kind of what's my job? And so there could be a lot of resistance there because we're not being clear enough around, hey, no, you still have a job, but it's, maybe servant leadership is how we'd like you to work on, or maybe work more with business partners and less with your team, for example, to figure out like what are the newer product features you want to add in the future, that kind of stuff. So I think it comes down to being successful at that means being holistic with your environment, with your at least that part of the hierarchy that you're trying to manipulate, or be more agile with, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like how you unfreeze people is you change their goals, right? Like you sort of like you change what their incentives and like how what their directives are and what they should be doing. Because I feel like, and I don't mean this as a insulting kind of way, but I feel like middle managers are good at running the bureaucracy, right? In the good sense of bureaucracy, like they're good at running the system. That's what they've been rewarded for, and that's what their job is. So once there's that kind of clear understanding of the system, it's a lot easier to just say like run the system, like operate in this way, not in just like running a factory way, but it requires quite a bit of that type of management.
Yeah, I think finding the right people to start with is important. Somebody with the right mindset or a group of people with the right mindset, and then you have to reward them when they're doing a good job. That's a requirement.
I think you also have to bring to life what it means to be a servant leader. If you've led in a certain way all your life and you're being asked to be a certain leader, you can read the words what it means. But I think being coached and supported, especially if you're under pressure for your teams to deliver a massive workload, I think it's really hard to switch to servant leadership and try it out and get away from habits that you've learned all your life and then try to operate differently. I think that's a challenge that requires empathy to help people to switch different way of working.
Yeah, and so in my current company, right, like I've held probably 8 different roles, all of them very different from each other, and you would think that I've got used to change, right? But change is very different and difficult for everybody. It is nearly impossible to put together a team that has the same level of enthusiasm for change, right? Whether it is a team of individual contributors or managers, right? And to tap in a little bit to your previous question, right? Like Mike, when managers feel that they only have the burden of making, some of these big decisions, that's when, they get into a state where it's like, hey, listen, if it ain't broken, let's not fix it, right? Whether you have enthusiasm up the stack or down the stack. However, right, if you put in the right pieces, right? We spoke about this a little bit ago, right? Like collaborative decisions and discussions up and down the stack, right? When you see changes happening in your industry and you need to bring together your technical leads and your management to start talking about how does this affect us, right? So that collaboration up and down the stack is definitely, one way that managers can become unfrozen, if you may, right? Because they feel they no longer feel that they alone have to make that decision, right? And I think also it's very important to keep your teams informed, right? Like when these changes happen, it doesn't have to be a perfect read that, hey, like we are going to do this, right? But if you send the message that like we are starting to see these shifts, and I think, we should keep an eye on it, maybe we should do a POC, etc. Giving that kind of heads up definitely helps the team also, be a little bit comfortable knowing that these things are coming, right? And I always take this analogy where like I have a couple of kids, right? And if I tell them, hey, like shut off your electronics now, right? They're all very, very upset, right? But if I told them like, hey, T-5 minutes to shut off electronics, they're very much more okay because they know it's coming, right? So, in addition to, bringing together, both sides of the stack, but also generating and making sure that, your team is also comfortable with the upcoming changes, and they know some of these are progressive, I think, it definitely helps managers, get more comfortable with the concept of becoming unfrozen or just doing the same thing over, and actually, managing, their teams up and down the stack in a much better fashion.
So one of the kind of picking up, to put it on one way, how management can kind of facilitate awesomeness, as it were, right? Make sure that the family is set up well to function and do things on their own, removing barriers and helping them out. Like one of the things, I always try to think about like vision and strategy, because I used to work in corporate strategy, and oh boy, vision. Am I right? That can really go all sorts of crazy ways. I love the vision that's basically like, we would like to provide maximum value to our shareholders, a generative place for our employees, and give back to our community. And who knows what they actually do. But you were giving a talk recently, Jana, and you put out a poll. You and Barely O'Reilly put out a poll, and I might be remembering this in my kind of cynical way, but I think you asked, how much do you rely on your organization's vision and strategy to drive what you do day to day? And I feel like maybe everyone said none, that it was a very shockingly low amount of people who were, attending that talk, who sort of, to put it in like an engineering kind of way, were able to use their company's vision and strategy as a tool to decide what to do each day. And I'm sure none of your three organizations are in that situation. Or any organization you've worked in. But, according to what you've heard from your friends, like how do you come up with like a good vision and strategy that's like tactical, that like is worth spending the time on it? How do you continually like garden that and nurture it? Jana?
I think one thing is, don't make it too abstract. Don't make it too long term. So it needs to be clear that something can be achieved by people in that strategy, and it's not something that the next generation does or the next 2 generations after me. It needs to be tangible, achievable, and it needs to really clearly link to something that I think intrinsically motivates people. So that goes back to, in my mind, to purpose. So what you just said, these sort of high level or empty things that are vanilla and could come from every organization aren't motivating you. So I think finding a way to tap into people's desire to help customers or make things better are ways to connect people to a strategy that becomes really usable and then can naturally guide people all the time back to what they're doing and see if that aligns.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, John, you've worked at a couple of different organizations over recent years, like a healthcare related place and an insurance place, and kind of building off that. How I like that idea of like, you want the I'll call them staff. You want people, whether they're managers or individuals, people making decisions day to day. You want them to kind of have that connection to the business, to customers. And like, how have you like found a way to introduce that into the organization if it was sort of lacking, or sort of like encourage that more? Like what are some interesting ways that have worked and maybe not worked to get to that point?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think I've probably failed at that more than I've been successful at it. But in the successful parts, really getting business people to join the IT teams and really blur that line of like, what is this team really about, helps a lot, because frequently business partners have a different perspective that they can bring, and they can say, no, this is really important to work on right now because of XYZ in the marketplace, or these customers have these problems, and I want the team to drive that way. So I think to tie the strategy stuff into it, if the strategy is really sort of practical, and the team can see how they can affect the vision and strategy, putting the business people alongside these, literally on the team with the IT people can really help to bring reality to what we're trying to do. And then oftentimes, even if the strategy, like Jana's point about not having a really long-term strategy, but even in a 6-month strategy, COVID happened. So you probably had to change your strategy. So having business people along for the ride with you allows the whole team to sort of react and change and move into these spaces that you had no idea you were going to have to do 3 months from now. So I think that partnership really, really matters. And it's really no different than these feedback loops that you have to generate to get, high performance teams moving quickly. You got to have a business person involved who's knowledgeable and willing to go along for the ride.
Mm-hmm. I have
and that counts at the executive level too, by the way. So.
Yep. I have a little bit of a different view too, right? Like, Mike, to your point, when you get off an all hands call, right? Like sometimes it's very difficult to understand and translate what that management speak is, to actual work. Right?
At least that's what our friends tell us who work in other organizations, right?
Yes. And, as an individual contributor, I was an individual contributor once. And when you are an individual contributor, it is not very natural for you to see that connection, because, once we put on our engineer hats, we just want to go and just, accomplish stuff, right? So I think managers, play a very important role in making sure that, we can connect the dots for individual contributors, right? We need to make sure that we reiterate, our success stories and failures, and make sure, our individual contributors understand how crucial, we are to the success of the organization, right? Some of the things that, I recommend, my employees do is like, when you run big platforms, you may have a huge number of customers, right? And sometimes in the day-to-day work, you forget to talk to your customers, right? And understand what piece of the puzzle are they solving, right? And once you start doing this, and you've collected enough pieces of the puzzle, right? You tend to start seeing and understanding how we connect the dots, right? So the next time, over a period of time, you will figure out that when management is speaking about something, how does this directly translate, into the stuff that, I am talking about? Certainly, you can reiterate the same things, during your team meetings, your town halls, your sprint plannings. And I think that is the piece that, is important for managers, right? To enable people to understand what this means and what the value of they do in terms of, business outcomes.
Yeah. I think that being the I can't think of a quippy word for it, but being that connector of dots is something that I notice a lot of people in the management layers shift over to, right? Like instead of just making sure that they have that weekly 4-hour meeting where everything's like green, yellow, and red, and
Yeah.
I guess you could call that project management. But they're trying to surface like things, the status of things, so that they can report it upwards, maybe for their own curiosity if they don't have anything more exciting going on in their life, but also just to see what they can help with. But there's almost this storytelling, I guess, to kind of explain like why what you're doing is valuable and good. And that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about that point of advocating for the strategy or the execution of it. And so now the other thing that I wanted to explore with y'all is the idea of, I've kind of alluded to this a few times, but the idea of career management for managers, right? And so like, if you are helping other people, that's not always the way to help yourself, so to speak, like in a corporate structure. And the first thing that I'm kind of interested in to start with, ultimately, the best question is always around compensation and how you get more of it. That's what we all want to know. But before we get to that point, one of the things I think you've been kind of musing about in email, Jana, is this idea of shifting the focus of managers to more focusing on like value, if you will, delivering business value. And even more abstractly, it occurs to me that if I'm an executive or someone kind of leading a bunch of other managers, I almost need to go to those managers and kind of tell them, this is the new things I want you to focus on, right? Like, these are the things I'm going to reward you for, the actions or the things you should find intrinsically valuable. and like, what are some of those things that if when you have sat down with managers and you're kind of explaining to them, here are new things you'll be doing, like new things I want you to focus on. What are some of those things?
It's really challenging because I think managers and leaders have been, certainly in my environment, have been trained all their lives to look for certain things. Like you say, is it red? Is it amber? Is it green? Are we on budget? Are we on time? So I think trying to get them to look at outcomes rather than outputs is a massive mindset shift. And it took me a while to understand it. So I was super curious to learn about it. So I think it's hard for someone who's got their mind full and who's been successful doing output work all their lives to think in a different way. So we are looking at really getting to people to think about outcomes and value. What's the ultimate customer value you're looking to deliver? Anything, I've made it quite stark to say anything inside the four virtual or real walls of the organization is almost mostly output. What goes out to our customers, outcomes. So how can we focus your thinking on anything that adds value to our customers? And that really starts shifting the thinking. And metrics, which we've recently redefined or are redefining, if you do that collaboratively with your management, you get often a lot of ask for metrics that define outputs. So going on a journey together to say, this is a vanity metric. How many people I've trained doesn't tell me whether we work in a different way. And just starting to have these conversations about what's the real value you're delivering. I think that trains and develops a new way of looking at problems and reporting, offering different reports and getting people to grips with looking at different things in terms of how things are doing and progressing and whether they're achieving outcomes. That's sort of the thing we're trying to do to introduce a different way of thinking. And even concepts like flow, which are probably very common in the engineering space, I think in financial services are not that obvious yet. So starting to ask managers to say, can we help optimize flow for teams is still a little bit alien. And getting people used to that idea and explaining it in different language and making it accessible, I think, is the way we're shifting.
Yeah, I want to use that. I was going to allow Neville and John to answer the question as well, but let me take that notion you just threw out there for a new line of thought, and that is, it's almost introducing engineering concepts into management, as you were kind of getting to. Yes. And I remember when I first started working in the managerial space, I keep doing this thing, that middle bureaucracy space of organizations. I'd come from being a developer and an industry analyst, And one of the first things that like really shocked me was that there were no tools. There was no like systems or tools or like, and the, to cut myself off from giving myself sort of like a bad nightmare from the past. Like the ultimate metaphor for this is people email around a Word document that ends in like, underscore V5A final, right? And just as a developer, nowadays it's a little better, but it seemed absurd to me that like anyone would think that was a good idea. But now, again, that's sometimes solved thanks to like online document stuff. But I'm curious in y'all's experience when it comes to changing the behavior of managers by sort of introducing tools to them. How do you get them to use new tools and ways of thinking? Like, is it easy or challenging? Like, I'm thinking about that because I remember my dad was a manager and I used to bring all these business books to him and he would kind of be like, nah, I don't care. Right? Like, I'm not really interested in like optimizing things and being a troublemaker. Right. And so when you're managing a whole phalanx of managers, how do you get them to stop sending that Word document around? Like, how about since you've kind of been in an engineering role, and now in manager, how about yourself, Neville? Have you encountered this thing, and how do you bring that engineering mentality to managers?
So I think I've had the benefit of having a great mentor. When I used to work for him as an individual contributor, like his first question was like listen, your accomplishments should not say that you closed n number of tickets in a year, but that you have eliminated the need of closing n number of tickets with automation that saved us X amount of hours to do more useful work, right? So for me, when we got in, when I got into the management, middle layer, right, that you were showing, Mike, I think it was important for me to ask the question, right, when somebody's asking you to do something new, I think it was very natural for us to say, okay, what does this one accomplish, right? Like, what is the business outcome as a result of us doing this? And the view, from say even like 10 years ago is very different from what we are doing today, right? So you have the ability to say, again, I kind of go back, right? You translating, your business needs from your organization, into manageable pieces that you can say, I am working this, towards, this major goal of my organization. And at the end of the year, as much as we have individual contributors doing a lot of work, the sum of what you do as a team is part of your accomplishments, right? And this is something that, again, we are actively working on and encouraging a lot more managers. And I think the notion, as Jana mentioned, to focus not on just outputs but on outcomes is actually more popular now than before. And today, as it becomes popular, it's a new fad, right? And everybody's talking about it and everybody's cognizant about it. It makes it easy so that when you are talking to a peer and saying, I need to do this, they are able to also make the connection to say, like, you're doing this because as an organization, here is our goal. I think it's a much easier talk now than it was, like I'd say 10 years ago, Mike.
Yeah. Maybe I just need to go do some more management and my view will be a lot less dim. But how about yourself, John? Like when it comes to whether it's an actual technology or kind of as Neville was getting more towards like a thought technology, right? Like the thought technology there being that as a manager, I would like you to be a catalyst for maybe even, is it a lodestone? I forget what the alchemists use, but I want you to be that catalyst for transforming business value to actual action. Like, how have you introduced new tools and technologies to people?
So the easiest way I've done that is just build a new team and just give them tools on day one, right? And don't actually try to change the existing teams. Like, so that works really well, but it takes a lot of bravery to do it that way. Incentivizing people on these business outcomes it's an excellent concept, and I totally agree with it. The tripping point, though, is these measurements are devilishly difficult to figure out and actually measure, and then hold your breath and reward or not reward, depending on how the metric turned out. That's, in my experience, the hardest part of the whole thing is getting agreement that the metrics are right and actually having them be right so that it works. Because the only other two outcomes would be, well, we'll just keep rewarding you the same way, even though your teams are working differently. That doesn't seem to work. Or the super brave executive decision is, well, maybe we need fewer managers, so I don't have to worry about it as much, right? So, I think all of that put together is really sort of at the conundrum right now with, okay, we know how to deliver software on these platforms in a super fast way, and we know how to fund them maybe, but we don't really know how to have a whole bunch of them where I need management in the middle. And I think that is just a problem that has not yet been solved.
So that I think when you brought up metrics, I think every 5 years we've got some new metric that either has a 3 or a 4-letter abbreviation, which is great. And then someone goes and finds some dimming and reads about metrics, and then the cycle begins again as they just table flip all of them into oblivion. And so this connects. There is no stronger connection that metrics has than to compensation and career. So I want to close out with the subject that I think is discussed. Would you say the least when it comes to managing managers, and that is how they manage their own careers, right? And I think a lot of the time you end up in management. There are, as I know you've called yourself before, Neville, accidental managers, but many times people end up in management because they would like to develop their career, right? They want to expand beyond what they've been doing. So sort of by definition, you already have a set of people who are managing their career, and also they're in charge of managing other people's careers. So this idea of advancement is in their head constantly. And so I'm curious in this, and I just use this loosely, in this servant leadership, this transformed way of doing management, what would you tell like individual managers, like here's how you safeguard, and less cynically, more optimistically, here's how you can really turbocharge. Do people still say that? I don't know. Here's how you can really further your career along. What are things managers should avoid when they're shifting over to doing things this way? And what are things that they can really rely on to help, increase their compensation and their career? And why don't we, let's start with you, Jana.
I don't know, maybe I'm giving you a bit of the too optimistic answer here. So I'm happy for John and Neville to take that down a notch. But my genuine view is if you love and enjoy working this way, you will, or what I've actually seen this happen. You love and enjoy what you do. You treat people as Neville said, like your family, and you support them. And that way naturally makes you then successful as a leader in the right conditions. And therefore, based on that success, the advancement happens. I think any forced advancement is challenging. And I think if you behave this way and are true to yourself, you feel better about yourself, you treat people better, and the advancement then naturally follows. And I have seen experience that. And if it doesn't, then it's probably a good time to switch organizations.
For sure. How about yourself, Neville? What's the advice you would give managers for managing their own careers?
Well, I wish I could create a brand new team like how John mentioned, but sometimes I did manage the team that I was on, right? And sometimes it's difficult to so change is, again, like I said, difficult, right? But that doesn't mean we should not attempt to change and improve the way show people a new way of doing things, right? Now, what you can start doing, like you want to focus more on going forward as a manager. What would I do in order to help and change the way my team and my directs work? I think is very important. Some of the things is again one's understanding what their skill sets are, what are things that they are really good at, right? And when you are hiring new people, you may want to take some pointers on what are things that are important to you as a manager, right? When there is an option to hire somebody new, you would index more on, great, I want a leader who, again, can change, is more receptive to change, is more flexible, right? So it's a combination of, bringing in new people who have the mindset that you need, but also developing, the folks that you have, because everybody that you have on your current team have that amount of expertise that, somebody new cannot bring in, right? So you need a new people to bring that new mindset and help the people who are existing here. But you also need folks who are on the team to help that new person understand this is the way, we function. So it's, I think, a matter of, give and take from both sides.
Yeah. And there's something, it's almost like a way to combining together what Jana and you said. If you as a manager show that or demonstrate that you're adaptable and you're sort of like making sure that the managers you manage or the team that you manage is also kind of up for change and always kind of trying out new things, then that's exactly the kind of behavior that hopefully your manager is asking for. and that's the kind of thing. Instead of making sure all those yellow and red like cells in the spreadsheet change to green and project managing, it's more that you can kind of show this flow of being agile, I guess,
yes.
is a nice way of showing your value at the annual performance review, as it were. So how about, I think you'll get the last word on this, John. How should managers be managing their own career?
I think as you demonstrate success in having teams operate a new way, you're going to naturally accumulate more work because people are going to be like, wait, this works really well. Here's another product. Here's another team. Can you train them? You're sort of naturally going to extend your reach. And then, hopefully you work for some executives or people who look at that and be like, hey, this person is really killing it. How about we make a change here, right? So, I think if, back to Jana's point, if you love doing that and that's what you're good at, then it's going to happen. Like, it's going to be unavoidable, frankly, unless you're in an organization that really doesn't care. And then, to Jana's point, time to move on.
Yeah, I think maybe that is, maybe to throw out two summaries. I think one, there's a combination of what Jana and Neville were saying, is that if you first ensure that you actually are supposed to behave differently, right? I think that's always a valuable thing to do in a job, to make sure that you can trust what was said in that town hall meeting, right? Which that requires your managers demonstrating that they actually want that to happen. Yeah, then you can sort of pursue doing a good job, right? Like showing that you are setting up your organization to be more agile and adaptive and learning how to do new things. And hopefully that's what you enjoy doing. And then I think the other, at that point, the other important thing, I think, and I've certainly had this in my career of career management, is like knowing when to leave. Just kind of saying that, like, I don't really fit here with how this organization wants to function or what they want from me. So I should find something else to do, because I'm going to either drive myself crazy or do poorly. And you've got to sort of always be aware of, to use a very old phrase, if your cheese is stinking, so that you can revitalize your cheese, as it were. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate the three of you joining on this and kind of collaborating on the content. And there will be, there's actually been a lot of interesting questions in the Slack channel for this session. So as we wrap this up, hopefully we'll get a chance in the Slack channel to maybe answer some questions. But also, when we end this session, you'll get a link to go to a sort of hallway thing where you can talk with us a little bit more. Now, I'm emceeing the track here, and Jana actually has a talk next, as I recall, which I'm looking forward to. So I don't know if we'll be able to join that session very much. But hopefully you'll join us there. And, if you have any other questions, all of us, I think, are easy to kind of find online and kind of engage with. And I would definitely recommend doing that if you have questions. So thanks for attending and for the questions. And thanks again to the panelists for helping out and giving your insights. I think John wins the best background. The kind of trees blowing in the background.
It's actually real. It's not a Zoom background.
Yeah. It's shocking that you're not terribly backlit. I don't know what happened there, but the lighting has worked out very well. So with that, if you want to hang out a little bit afterwards, if you're in the Slack channel, you can go find the hallway thing, and hopefully you'll attend the next talk by Jana to see some more from her. Thanks.
Good luck, Jana.
Thanks very much.
All right.